Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, okay? And soften the space between your eyebrows. You're safe here. You're warm. You're at peace. Let the quiet wrap around you like a soft blanket. Breathe in deeply, and as you exhale, feel the weight of the day slip away. Tonight, I invite you to drift with me into a story as old as rain and wood, as ancient as sky and sea. The only sound you hear now is the soft rhythm of my voice, like a lullaby from long ago, and a distant memory of waves. Our story tonight sets sail on a sea without end. It had been 40 days of gentle rocking, 40 days of water tapping against wooden beams, in the hush of endless sky melting into sea. Inside the ark, the air was heavy with quiet, not silence. No, the ark had its own song, the breath of sleeping animals, the creak of timber as it swayed gently in the cradle of deep waters, the soft coo of doves tucked into high beams. Noah sat by the open window, a narrow hatch at the top of the ark, just wide enough to let the breath of the outside world touch his skin. The air was cool tonight, tinged with the scent of salt and wood and something faint, something green. He closed his eyes and let the wind touch his face like a hand that remembered him. The world had been washed clean. Outside, nothing stirred, only the quiet rippling of water and the memory of trees, of stones, of gardens, long forgotten. Somewhere beneath, the land waited, sleeping beneath waves. Noah reached into a small wicker cage and lifted a dove. She blinked at him with curious black eyes, her chest rising and falling with a steady, peaceful rhythm. He whispered to her, though no words were needed. She understood. He held her in both hands and raised her toward the sky, toward the hatch. She waited, then lifted into the air, a flutter of white wings brushing the edge of cloud-filtered light, and she was gone. Hours passed. Noah leaned against the curved wall of the ark, listening to the world breathe. His fingers traced the grain of the wood, worn smooth from prayer and time. He remembered the sound of gardens, of laughter before the rain. He remembered the scent of olives and honey. He remembered peace, and he waited. From above, the hush of feathers stirred the air. He opened his eyes. The dove had returned, and in her beak, a single olive leaf cupped his hands, and she fluttered down gently, as if she'd been gone only moments. As if she'd never left. The olive leaf was fresh, vivid, alive, soft and green like hope that had been sleeping. He held it to his chest and felt the slow warmth of a tear slide down his face. The waters were receding. The world was still, and peace had returned. Now, close your eyes. Let the rhythm of the ark rock you to sleep. He imagined the gentle lull of waves, coo of a dove above, the creak of wood that has kept you safe through the night. You're wrapped in a blanket of calm. Breathe in slowly and exhale. The dove has returned, and you are home. Hush, sleep, little traveler. The storm has passed. The next morning arrived, not in a rush of light, but in the slow exhale of dawn. A gentle gray pulled itself over the sky, stretching like wool pulled across a window pane. Inside the ark, the air was cool and still. Noah stirred, rising slowly from his resting place on the floor beside the hatch. He looked up. The dove sat quietly on her perch, feathers tucked and still. She blinked at him again, calm, unhurried. He took that as a sign. It was time to send her again. She had returned once. The land was not far now. He stepped carefully across the straw-covered floor, nodding gently to the animals who stirred in their stalls. A pair of antelope blinked in rhythm. A lioness sighed in her sleep. The elephants dozed, side by side, their trunks curled in peace. At the hatch, Noah whispered a prayer, quiet, steady blessing on the wind. Then he opened it and lifted the dove again. She paused and then took flight. This time, he did not wait by the hatch. He sat near the center of the ark, a clay bowl of warm broth in his hands. Around him, the soft rhythms of the ark's life began again, not in words or noise, but in simple, breathing presence. He listened to the lapping water beyond the hull. He listened to the creak of the ropes above him. He listened to the silence that asked nothing of him, and he thought about what would come next. The ark had become its own world, a floating womb of quiet and wood and breath. Outside, the earth was being reborn, but what would it look like? He let his eyes close again and drifted into a half-sleep, letting the hum of the ark pull him deeper. And in his sleep, he dreamed. He was walking along a path lined with olive trees, their branches curved low and welcoming. Doves circled above, and beneath them, grass grew thick and dewy. In the distance, he saw vineyards and children's laughter in the shape of tents rising along the horizon. And when he awoke, his hands still cupped the warmth of the dream. A sound above, the soft flutter of wings. He opened his eyes and looked toward the hatch. The dove had returned again. This time, she did not carry a leaf. She simply landed, perched, and tilted her head at him. And in that quiet, Noah understood. She had found a place to rest, a place to stay. The waters had gone. The next morning arrived not in a rush of light, but in the slow exhale of dawn. A gentle gray pulled itself over the sky, stretching like wool pulled across a window pane. Inside the ark, the air was cool and still. Noah stirred, rising slowly from his resting place on the floor beside the hatch. He looked up. The dove sat quietly on her perch, feathers tucked and still. She blinked at him again, calm, unhurried. A pair of antelope blinked in rhythm. A lioness sighed in her sleep. The elephants dozed, side by side, their trunks curled in peace. He took that as a sign. It was time to send her again. She had returned once. Perhaps the land was not far now. He stepped carefully across the straw-covered floor, nodding gently to the animals who stirred in their stalls. At the hatch, Noah whispered a prayer, a quiet, steady blessing on the wind. Then he opened it and lifted the dove again. She paused, and took flight. This time, he did not wait by the hatch. He sat near the center of the ark, a clay bowl of warm broth in his hands. Around him, the soft rhythms of the ark's life began again, not in words or noise, but in simple, breathing presence. He listened to the lapping water beyond the hull. He listened to the creak of the ropes above him. Doves circled above, and beneath them, grass grew thick and dewy. In the distance, he saw vineyards and children's laughter in the shape of tents rising along the horizon. He listened to the silence that asked nothing of him, and he thought about what would come next. The ark had become its own world, a floating womb of quiet and wood and breath. Sighed, the earth was being reborn, but what would it look like? He let his eyes close again and drifted into a half-sleep, letting the hum of the ark pull him deeper. And in his sleep, he dreamed. He was walking along a path lined with olive trees, their branches curved low and welcoming. And when he woke, his hands still cupped the warmth of the dream. A sound above. Noah stood at the hatch, a quiet breath slipping from his lips as he gazed out into the open. The waves had softened like a lullaby near its end. The horizon had shaped now, distant, gentle ridges rising where once there was only water. Hills, perhaps the tops of trees, a soft flutter of wings. His vessel, built plank by plank, in obedience and in hope, had become his sanctuary, a moving cradle for the promise of new life. He opened his eyes and looked toward the hatch. They sensed it too, a change in the current, a shift in the air. The scent of rain had faded, replaced by something warmer, something earthen. The dove had returned again. This time, she did not carry a leaf. She trembled in his hand, then grew still, eyes meeting his with quiet trust. She simply landed, perched and tilted her head at him. And in that quiet, Noah understood. She had found a place to rest, a place to stay. The waters had gone. Somewhere, dry land waited. As stars emerged, one by one, across the velvet sky, Noah sat beside the hatch, his knees drawn up, arms resting upon them, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something just out of reach. That evening, the sky unfolded like silk, streaked in the golden hush of sunset. The ark rested in the background, half shadowed by the morning sun. Around him, animals stirred, blinking toward the light. Trees rose nearby, short, new growth with bright green leaves. Doves circled in the sky. The ark rocked gently, more steady than before. Below deck, the animals stirred with a different rhythm now. Noah ran his hand along the wooden wall beside him. He reached for a second dove, this one smaller, her feathers tipped in soft gray. He lifted her into the fading light, letting her wings stretch slowly into the open sky. She waited, and then lifted off. This time, Noah watched until she disappeared into the amber distance. Night fell gently, and with it came a hush deeper than before. The stars were clearer now, no mist, no cloud, only the quiet glitter of heaven spilled above. His eyes drifted closed, and in that sleep, another dream came. He stood on solid ground, damp, soft earth beneath his feet. He bent to the earth and planted a seed, a single olive pit from the leaf he had been given. He covered it gently with soil, and in the dream, he smiled. When Noah woke, the sky had begun to pale at the edges, like a canvas being washed in light. Dew clung to the rafters above, and the wooden floor beneath him was cool with the breath of early morning. He rose slowly, reverently, like one waking not from sleep, but from prayer. The ark was still, more still than ever. He walked toward the hatch and opened it. This time, he didn't send a dove. He didn't need to, 'cause there it was, land, but a gentle slope leading down to a valley with green buds breaking through rich brown soil. It's dry, solid, sun-warmed earth. Not just a mountaintop or a distant shadow, he exhaled. The breath carried the weight of days and storms and waiting, carried gratitude and memory and the fragile hope of a new beginning. Behind him, the animals stirred. They knew, soon, it would be time to open the doors, to step into the morning. Noah stood for a long time at the edge of the hatch, his fingers curled gently over the frame. There was no rush, no wind pushing them onward. The moment waited for him, patient and still. Birds shifted in the rafters, feathers rustling like silk. Noah walked between the stalls, murmuring gently, his voice no louder than the hush of a stream. The air that drifted in now was different, not just clean, but rich. It carried with it the scent of earth after rain, the aroma of damp bark, and the faint sweetness of new blossoms awakening in the valleys below. The sky stretched wide above him, brushed in soft gold and lavender. Shem and Ham followed, and together they began untying the latches, the great wooden bolts that had sealed them in. The sound of it, the first creak of heavy timber in motion, was like thunder in slow motion. He turned and stepped down into the belly of the ark. The animals were waking slowly. A lion stretched with a yawn like a whisper. Tea was too perfect, too sacred. They looked to him, eyes filled with questions and wonder. He nodded. The smallest movement and a breath passed between them, one of reverence, one of awe. "It's nearly time," he whispered. He found his family gathered in the center of the ark, seated on woven mats. Japheth stood first, his hands calloused and ready. He picked up a handful, holding it up like treasure. Aline hailed. Outside, the birds began to sing. He said nothing, letting them find their place, letting the world welcome them back. One by one, In pairs, they emerged into the quiet sunlight, hooves against earth, paws pressing softly into grass, wings stretching wide for the first true flight in weeks. Not loudly, just a few at first, doves, sparrows, maybe a lark, their notes drifting across the open water and touching the new land like blessings. With careful fingers, he unwrapped the olive leaf, now dry and fragile. He held it against the breeze for a moment, then dug a small hole. Noah stepped to the door. It opened with effort, and then light poured in. Not just light, but warmth. It touched his face, his hands, his shoulders. He blinked into it, and for a moment, he did not move. Then he stepped forward, one foot onto the plank that reached from ark to earth. It felt firm beneath him, soft, but real. Not water, not the memory of storms, but the ground, alive, breathing, ready. He looked into the fire, the glow dancing in his eyes. He crouched and placed his palm against it. Not lost, not forsaken, held. It was damp and warm, the soil crumbling slightly at his touch. And then, finally, he smiled. The animals moved slowly, instinct guiding their steps. They stepped from the ark, not with fear, but with wonder. Sparks floated like stars into the darkening sky, where real stars had begun to show their faces again. The scent of earth and cedar and soft wool blankets wrapped around your shoulders. Noah stood to the side, watching, hands folded behind his back. Birds lifted into the air, circling lazily, calling out to one another. The sky opened for them. The forest, distant and dappled, seemed to nod in greeting. Noah knelt again, pressing a knee to the ground. He placed it there gently, covering it with loose soil. Beside it, he buried a prayer, not with words, but with breath. Slow, deep exhale. Later that evening, with the ark behind them and the valley before them, Noah and his family lit a fire. The crackling flames rose quietly, not to conquer the silence, but to warm it. They sat in a circle, sons, wives, Noah's weathered hands holding a small cup carved from cedar. "We were held," he said softly, his voice the same one he used in prayer. Around them, the land listened. Beyond them, rivers murmured, trees rustled. Somewhere, far away, the first frogs began to sing. It was the song of the world beginning again, and it would carry them forward. Now, my dear listener, let yourself be held. Feel the warmth of the fire, the cool air brushing across your cheeks. Let this story settle in your chest like a bird returning to its nest. Your eyes may be heavy. Let them close. Let the rhythm of the world cradle you, like the ark rocked gently on the waters. You are safe. You are at peace. And the dove has returned. Sleep now, sleep. And so, the days passed, quiet and golden. Each morning arrived like a soft sigh, drifting over the hills, brushing the valley floor in pale light. Noah and his family set about their work with gentle hands and steady hearts. They began to build, not walls this time, nor arks to keep the world out, but homes to welcome the world in. With each beam he lifted, each stone he set, he remembered. He remembered the building of the ark, the years it had taken, the weight of every doubt he'd carried, and the quiet certainty that it never left him. Simple structures of woven wood and softened stone, nestled near the edge of the trees, where the breeze carried birdsong and the sun fell warm in wide patches across the clearing. Noah's hands were slower than they once were, but still sure. Japheth worked on digging channels, letting water flow gently from the stream to the fields. Ham gathered seeds, pressing each one into the ground with the same care one might offer a prayer. This time, the building was different, lighter, freer. There was no storm to race against, no judgment overhead, only peace and purpose. Shem planted herbs near the base of the hill, thyme and lavender, their scents catching on the wind and trailing through camp. The animals found their rhythms, too. Some wandered toward the forest edge. Others grazed in the tall grasses near the stream. Birds made nests in the crooks of the trees, and in time, the ark stood quiet and empty, not abandoned, but honored, a monument of memory, a cradle of before. Noah often stood by it at dusk. It was as though she had not simply returned. She had stayed, watching, waiting, trusting. He would lay his hand on the weathered planks. Feeling the warmth of the sun held in the wood, he would close his eyes and listen, not to the voices of animals or the echo of rain, but to the stillness that had taken their place. It was the stillness of completion. See, in one evening, beneath the sky so clear it seemed made of glass, he saw the dove again. She perched on a low branch, just a few feet away, her feathers silvered by starlight. She did not move when he approached. Noah sat beneath the tree, legs folded, hands resting in his lap. He said nothing. The dove blinked slowly, and for a moment, the air between them felt thick with understanding. She ruffled her feathers once, then settled again, and Noah smiled. He leaned back, gazing up through the leaves, where stars peeked through the gaps like whispers. His breath was slow, steady, like the world itself was breathing with him. Now, dear listener, feel the earth beneath you. Feel it cradle you, soft and strong. The storm is over, but the ark has landed. The world is new, and you are part of its unfolding. Breathe in. From there, he could see far across the rising land, a place beginning again. But always, Noah returned to the same place each evening, a high ridge shaded by a single fig tree. There, he sat, grass unrolled like a green carpet over hills that once lay beneath fathoms of water. Saplings reached toward the sky with tender fingers. Streams carved soft songs through the soil. And as you exhale, feel the weight of yesterday dissolve into stillness. You are safe. You are cherished. And like the dove, returning to Noah, what needed to be said had already been whispered to the waves, offered to the sky, and sealed into the wood of the ark. You are home. Sleep well. Sleep deep. The sound was light, like bells shaking gently in the breeze. Joy unburdened. Birds darted through the trees. Bees hummed among the blossoms. The world was waking, alive with color and song. More peace waits with each breath. In the days that followed, Noah walked often to the edge of the valley. Sometimes he walked alone. Sometimes one of his sons would follow, carrying baskets of seeds or bundles of tools, and watched. He watched the land grow. He watched clouds curl into purple dusk. He watched stars return to their places. Hay did not speak much now. The time for words had passed. There was only quiet, and quiet was enough. One morning, as dew still clung to the blades of grass, Noah woke to a sound he hadn't heard in many weeks. Laughter. It came from the lower grove, where his sons and their wives had begun preparing a wide field for planting. He paused in his step and let it wash over him. There had been sorrow. There had been fear. But now, joy had returned, and it sounded like home. As the sun rose higher, golden light spilled across the land like honey. And in the stillness beneath the fig tree, Noah prayed, not aloud, but through every breath, every heartbeat, every moment spent in reverent awe. That night, after the sun had dipped low and painted the clouds in blush and bronze, Noah sat again beneath the stars. This time, a small child sat beside him, a granddaughter, her eyes wide with wonder. She pointed upward. "Are those the same stars you saw in the water, grandfather?" He nodded slowly. "They are. Did they follow you?" He smiled. "No, little one. They watched over us." She leaned her head against his arm, and together they watched the constellations rise, slow and patient, ancient lights reborn over a world made new. In her hands, she held a small carved dove, a gift from Noah. shaped from a sliver of arc wood. She cradled it like something sacred. And in that moment, Noah knew the story would be remembered. The peace would continue, and the dove would fly again, not as a sign of survival, but as a symbol of hope, passed gently from one generation to the next. Let that hope rest in your heart now, dear listener. Let it rise and fall with your breath. The waves have stilled. The land has risen. The stars have returned. Peace, deep, quiet peace, waits gently beside you. Sleep now. You are held. You are loved. And the story is not ending. It is only beginning. The next day dawned softly, wrapped in mist. The air was damp and cool, but not cold. It smelled of moss and spring, the kind of spring that births not just blossoms, but entire worlds. The camp had taken on the feel of permanence, yet everything still pulsed with freshness, like the land was breathing for the first time. A heron stood still and tall in the shallows, watching the current with perfect stillness. Noah nodded to it, as if the creature had been keeping silent company all along. Noah rose early. He moved slowly through the sleeping camp, past baskets of grain and fresh-laid stones. Down by the riverbank, reeds swayed. There were no fences, no borders, only harmony. He stooped to collect water with a clay jar, pausing to watch the sunlight ripple across the surface. His reflection shimmered back, a face older now, but not worn, weathered by grace. He touched the surface of the water and let the ripples carry outward. All living things were returning, not by force, but by welcome. As he stood, he spotted tracks in the soft mud. Deer, boar, perhaps even bear. The earth had remembered them. It fed the rivers. It tapped lightly against tent flaps and the wooden ribs of the resting ark, and they had remembered the earth. In the days that followed, the sky wept softly, but this was no flood. Just warm rain drifting from the heavens like a lullaby. It kissed the crops. Noah stood beneath it, often, arms open, letting it fall over him, not hiding, not fearing, simply receiving. A rustle, a hum, a patient stretching of roots and limbs. And the rain brought with it something new each time. Wildflowers blooming in the hills, new shoots pushing through tilled soil, streams thick with silverfish. And everywhere, the sound of growth, not loud, but present. She's in the air, in the trees, in you. Life unfolded slowly, steadily, beautifully. One morning, Noah found his granddaughter placing stones in a circle near the tree where he often sat. She looked up as he approached, eyes bright. "It's for the dove," she said. Noah smiled. "Will she come back?" she asked. He crouched beside her, brushing the dirt from her fingertips. Notes his father had sung before the rains, and his father before him. Songs that carried memory through the bones. "She'd never really laughed," he said. The girl looked around, as if seeing for the first time. The sway of branches, the stretch of sky, the rustle of wheat nearby. "Then I'll leave seeds here too," she whispered. And she did. A handful of sunflower, flax, and fig pressed into the center of the circle with tender care. Noah touched her head gently. Hope was no longer just a memory. It had taken root. Let the breath you take now be slow, wide, and deep. At night, the fire burned low, more embers than flame. The stars glittered like they were scattered just above the treetops. Noah would often hum old melodies, not words, but tones, and the children would fall asleep to the sound of it, wrapped in furs, heads resting on soft moss pillows, dreams stirred gently by firelight and ancient lullabies. They dreamed of doves, of olive branches, of gardens not yet planted. Somewhere between the cracks of those dreams, peace continued its quiet work. You, too, are part of this. Let your shoulders sink. Let your thoughts loosen. 8. Let the soil beneath your spirit soften. You are a garden waiting to bloom. The sun will rise, and what is meant to grow will grow. There is no rush. The rains will come. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. All around you, doves still fly. All around you, the stars still sing. All around you, peace is near. One evening, as twilight blanketed the hills, Noah gathered with his family around the fire. The flames flickered gently, and shadows danced across their faces like old friends returned. The meal had been simple: roasted roots, a stew of lentils and herbs, warm flat bread cooked on stone. Its laughter lingered in the air, carried softly between spoonfuls, passed like a blessing. When the bowls were emptied and the sky was streaked with violet and indigo, Noah leaned forward. In his lap, he held a small scroll, one of the few that had survived the journey. Tonight, he said, quietly, we remember. And he began to speak. Not just a story, but the story of the rain, the building, the animals, the long silence of the waiting, of the faith it took to keep building when the skies were still clear, of the ache in his chest when the first drops fell, of the joy and fear that mingled as the doors were sealed. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. The children leaned in. Fire popped softly. Somewhere, a night bird called, and Noah's words wrapped them like the ark had once wrapped their world, strong and warm and full of purpose. The next day, Noah and Shem walked further than usual, past the eastern grove, over a ridge, into a meadow that stretched like an emerald sea. Wildflowers bloomed in every direction. Bees worked joyfully. The grass reached their knees. At the far end, they found a ring of stones. Noah paused. He tilted his head. This wasn't here before, he murmured. Shem knelt beside the stones. At the center, a single white feather lay atop a bed of moss. Noah crouched next to him. He reached out, lifted the feather, and held it to the sun. It rose for a moment, then drifted back into Noah's palm. A sign, Shem asked. Perhaps, Noah whispered. Or perhaps just a quiet reminder that peace leaves traces. As the weeks passed, the valley grew louder, not with noise, but with life. The bleating of newborn lambs, the chorus of frogs after dusk, the rustle of children running between tents, chasing butterflies and carrying baskets of fruit. Each day added color. Each moment added memory. And Noah watched it all like a scribe watches ink dry on parchment, knowing each mark meant something, knowing the whole would one day be read. One night, he carved a line into the oldest tree in the camp. Not words, just a mark. A single curve, like the shape of a wave that had once covered the world, and then receded. He touched the bark and nodded to himself. He had not just survived, he had begun. Let your mind rest on that. You have begun. Even now, as your body grows still and your breath slows, you are beginning again. Not chasing, not rushing, just returning, like the dove, like the leaf, like the sun on the first dry day. Sink deeper into the quiet. Feel the stories settle into your bones. You are part of it, in peace. Steady, sacred peace is near. Sleep. In the calm that followed, each day began to blend into the next, like watercolors bleeding gently into one another. Noah took to rising before the sun. The air then was cool, the sky painted with the faintest hint of lavender, and the world held its breath in the hush before awakening. He would walk the ridge quietly, hands behind his back, eyes turned to the horizon. Each step left a soft print in the damp grass, each breath a moment of communion with the morning. Birdsong stirred gradually, a flutter of wings, a high trill in the treetops. Even the wind seemed to hold a rhythm now, no longer the roar of a storm, but the gentle pulse of a planet at peace. He often passed a circle of stones where the feather had once rested. Flowers now bloomed around its edges. Someone, perhaps his granddaughter again, had added tiny shells, a woven bracelet of reeds, and a smooth river stone etched with the sunburst. Offerings of gratitude, reminders of renewal. That afternoon, Japheth called out from the forest's edge. He had found a patch of figs ripening in the sun. The branches were heavy, the fruit soft and sweet. They gathered in woven baskets and passed them hand to hand, juice staining their fingers, laughter rippling through the trees. For a moment, it felt like Eden, the way the stories told of the beginning, not in grandeur, but in stillness, in joy shared freely, in the miracle of simple things. And as the figs were sliced and dried, set aside for the coming seasons, Noah closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for rain, not for rescue, but for the wisdom to hold joy like this in the days ahead. Night settled softly again, cloaking the world in starlight. Noah sat alone beneath the fig tree. He no longer needed to speak aloud. The stars, the earth, the fireflies blinking like thoughts in the dark. They knew. He held the carved dove in his hand, its wooden wings smooth from touch. Gently, he placed it atop a stone near the roots of the tree, facing the eastern sky. He looked up. The stars above were countless, the same ones he had watched over the deep, and in their gaze, he felt not smallness, but belonging. Now, dear listener, let this night cover you gently. Let the quiet take root in your chest. Feel the story rise and fall with your breath. The arc of the dove, the promise of a leaf, the softness of the first dry path. It's all part of your becoming. You are not lost. You are found, held, and like Noah beneath the stars, you are never alone. Sleep well now. Sleep deeply. The following morning, clouds drifted low across the hills like wool pulled gently across the sky. The light that filtered through was soft and silvered, as if the world were wrapped in a great blanket of hush. Noah awoke to the scent of warm bread. Shem's wife had baked early, the dough rising golden in the stone oven, and the aroma wound its way through camp like a promise. Birds stirred. A donkey brayed lazily. It was a slow morning, the kind that asked nothing of anyone, just presence, just breath. Noah stepped outside with a linen shawl over his shoulders, his sandals quiet against the dirt path. His granddaughter was already awake, brushing dew from flower petals near the garden bed. She looked up at him and smiled, the kind of smile that anchored a man's heart in the present. He sat beside her and pointed toward the fig tree. "No," he said softly. "I believe that tree listens." She blinked at him. To what? 2 prayers not spoken. She considered that, then nodded. Together they watched the wind curl through its branches, leaves swaying like gentle yeses to the morning. Later that day, a small group of deer emerged from the woods. Not startled, not shy. They stepped into the open clearing with the dignity of beings who belonged. The family watched from a distance as the animals approached the stone ring. One doe sniffed the offering of reeds and shells, then knelt, folding her limbs beneath her slowly, and rested there. Even the wild had found peace. Even the untamed had found home. That night, Noah stood beside the ark for the first time in days. It had grown quiet again, no longer a vessel, but a memory. Its ribs had begun to fade in color, dulled by sun and wind. Vines crept across its flanks. Moss softened its edges. It did not look forgotten, looked returned, like something ancient given back to the earth. He ran his fingers along the grain of the wood. "Thank you," he whispered in his mind, "for holding us, for saving us, for releasing us." He stepped away slowly, leaving it behind like a chapter closed, but not erased. And now, listener, step away, too. Step gently into your rest. Let the past be the ark, strong, sacred, but behind you. Let the present be the path. Let the future bloom like figs in sunlight and prayers rising like morning steam. Sleep now. You are held, not in wood and nail, but in peace. You are not adrift. You are home. sleep. The next week brought new rhythms. By now, the days had stretched long and golden, filled with the hum of bees and the soft crackle of cooking fires. The children had begun calling the ridge above the fig tree Watch Hill, and every evening they raced to its peak to see who could spot the first star. Noah would climb up slowly behind them, his hands clasped behind his back, smiling as their voices carried on the wind. He rarely reached the top before the stars appeared, but he didn't mind. He wasn't there to win. He was there to witness. The earth had taken on a new steadiness, like a heart that had once fluttered in distress, now beating with calm confidence. The fields were lined with vegetables. Small orchards had taken root. A clay kiln had been built near the river, and pots stood drying in rows like squat sentinels. One afternoon, Japheth led Noah to a cluster of saplings they'd planted weeks ago. "They're strong," Japheth said, brushing soil from his hands. "The roots have taken." Noah knelt beside one, a young olive tree with bright leaves, his fingers pressed into the cool soil. "They'll bear fruit," he whispered. "In time." Japheth nodded. "For our children's children." That evening, by the fire, Noah's wife hummed a melody older than memory. It had no name, no verses, just the rise and fall of a voice like breath woven into music. The others joined softly, not in harmony, but in shared remembrance. As flames flickered and shadows played along the stone walls of their homes, Noah leaned back and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The sounds of peace were many: footsteps in grass, children's laughter in the distance, the clink of pottery, the wind gently brushing canvas. These were the sounds that now cradled the world. Some days later, a visitor arrived, not a man nor a beast, but a breeze, unlike any that had passed since they'd landed. It came warm and wild, carrying with it a scent Noah had tanned tea smelled in many months, the salt of the distant sea. He followed it to the southern ranch, where the land sloped gently toward a line of forest, and beyond that, far beyond, the shimmer of blue on the horizon. He stood for a long time, the wind tugging at his shawl, the scent of ocean curling around him like memory. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes and let it wash over him. The sea had not forgotten him. It had sent a kiss on the wind, a thank you, a farewell. Back at the encampment, his granddaughter was helping her mother lay stones for a new hearth. She waved when she saw him, and Noah raised a hand in return. He watched as she placed each stone carefully, making sure the circle stayed unbroken. Her movements were slow, patient. She was building something, not to survive, but to live. Noah turned toward the woods, where the birds were calling the dusk home. A fox darted between ferns. The air shimmered with the last gold of day. In his chest, something lightened. It had taken time, many days, many losses, many silences, but the heaviness was lifting, not gone, but changed. The weight of the past was no longer an anchor, it was a foundation, and from it a new world was rising. The following morning, clouds rested low on the hills like silent sentinels. Mist curled through the tall grasses and laced itself around tree trunks. The world felt sacred, paused in reflection. Noah stepped out of his tent and paused, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of damp earth and growing things, the scent of peace taking root. A small group of boys was gathering smooth stones along the riverbed. They spoke in hushed tones, as if instinctively sensing the stillness of the morning. One of them found a flat, black stone with a natural white stripe and held it up like treasure. Noah watched quietly from the shade, a faint smile pulling at his lips. He was remembering. Not just the flood, not just the storm, but before it all. Days spent with his sons when they were young, collecting wood, setting traps, learning the rhythms of animals and sky. He remembered explaining the constellations, tracing lines between stars with fingers pointed upward. Now his sons taught their own children. The memory folded gently into the moment, like thread woven back into a cloth. Later that day, Noah visited the ark again. Vines now crawled up its sides in full embrace, leaves fluttering like green hands in prayer. A pair of owls had made their home near one of the old upper windows, their eyes blinking slowly as Noah approached. He did not enter. He simply walked along its outer wall, brushing his palm across the wood. He whispered the names of those who had walked inside with him: his father, his brothers, his people. Not all had survived the flood, but in speaking their names, he kept them close. The ark had carried more than animals and family, had carried memory, and it had delivered it safely to a future. A few days later, a gathering was held. It was not formal. There were no speeches, just a shared meal on the flat rocks near the riverbank. Families sat in small clusters. Baskets of grain and fruit were passed between hands. A fire burned low. Laughter rose gently, like steam curling from a bowl. Japheth stood and poured a small libation into the earth. "To the old world," he said. Ham added, "And to this one." Noah lifted a wooden cup, carved from ark timber, and said only, "May we never forget either." And so they ate, not in mourning, but in reverence, for what had passed, for what remained, and for what would come. Children wove garlands from reeds. Women hummed over their stitching. Men shared stories in half-voiced tones, eyes sparkling with memory and hope. The world was not perfect, but it was a beginning, and that beginning was enough. That night, long after the fire had dimmed, Noah wandered alone to Watch Hill. He lay on his back in the grass, arms folded beneath his head. The stars above blinked bright and clear, ancient witnesses to the journey of mankind. He closed his eyes and listened, not for voices or signs, but for silence. He heard everything: the sea's retreat, the laughter of his sons, the flutter of wings, the heartbeat of a world restored. He stayed there a long time, until the stars wheeled overhead and the grass beneath him warmed with the promise of another dawn. A new day waited, and he was ready to meet it. The sun rose slow and honey-colored over the valley, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the hills. A breeze moved through the barley fields, carrying with it the scent of wild mint and distant pine. The land, once silent and waterlogged, now pulsed with life, not in bursts, but in quiet, confident rhythms. That morning, Noah met with Shem and Japheth beneath the sycamore near the river. A table of smooth-hewn wood had been set up, and spread across it were scrolls and sketches, bits of string and stone. We're planning, not defense, not escape, but the layout of a village, a real one, not tents, but homes, not paths beaten down by uncertainty, but roads chosen with care. They spoke in low, thoughtful voices. The water wheel that Ham had begun building would help grind grain. A second kiln was nearly ready for firing. A wall of stacked stone would protect the orchard from erosion. Noah watched as Japheth bent over a charcoal sketch and began marking lines in the earth with his staff. They were shaping the world now, not merely surviving it. It filled Noah with a quiet awe. That afternoon, a storm rolled through, came without warning, the way mountain weather sometimes does. Sudden wind, dark clouds, a sharp drop in temperature, but no one panicked. The animals were quickly guided to shelter. Children ran inside, laughing, half excited by the thrill of thunder. And Noah, he stepped outside. Rain pattered down, soaking his shoulders, collecting in his beard. He lifted his face to the sky. It no longer brought fear, only memory. He stood in the center of the village in progress and let the rain fall. A cleansing, not a judgment. A reminder, not a threat. When the clouds passed, the air smelled sharper, cleaner, like the page of a book turned crisp and new. In the coming weeks, the village took shape. Walls rose from timber and stone. Doors were carved and painted. Lamps made from clay and braided flaxwick lined the paths at night. Music returned. Flutes carved from bone, drums from stretched hide, even a harp fashioned from the remains of a broken animal stall. Songs drifted on the air long into the evenings, not laments, but lullabies and laughter. Each home had a small garden, and in the center of the village they left a circle untouched, a sacred grove of fig, olive, and date trees. In its center stood the stone ring, now polished and ringed with flowers. Noah would sit there often, watching the people move around him. He no longer needed to lead. Now he bore witness. In that witnessing, he found rest. Late one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to fire, his granddaughter came to him with a bundle in her hands. It was a small bird, carved of soft wood, its wings outstretched. "I made her," she said. "The dove, like the one you told us about." Noah took it carefully, turning it in his weathered hands. "She carries peace," the girl added, "but also memory." Noah looked into her eyes and saw generations yet to come. Their strength, their curiosity, their reverence. He nodded, then let her fly, and together they placed the carved dove at the base of the grove's oldest tree. A prayer in wood, a promise in silence, story still unfolding. The following morning, dew glistened on the grass like a blanket of stars scattered upon the earth. The early sun had barely kissed the hilltops when Noah's granddaughter returned to the grove. She knelt beside the carved dove, now flecked with beads of moisture, and whispered something only the wind could carry. Then, with the careful hands of someone tending to something sacred, she began clearing away fallen leaves, placing new pebbles in a ring around the wooden bird. She wasn't playing. She was preserving. Noah watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt. He understood now that the stories he had carried were not just for remembering. They were for passing. The girl glanced up and caught him looking. She waved him over. "I want to hear the one again," she said, about the window. Noah smiled and sat beside her. The window in the ark. She nodded eagerly. "It was small," he said, "not for looking out, but for letting in." She leaned in, and Noah began. It was the only opening to the sky, and for days, when the rain came and the ark creaked and the animals stirred in the dark, it was our promise that there was still a sky, still light, still hope. He paused, letting the silence settle. "That window," he continued, "was where we released the raven, and later, the dove." He turned his gaze to the small wooden figure between them. And one day, it came back, with a leaf, the girl whispered. He smiled. Yes, a simple thing, but it meant the world had begun again. The sun climbed higher, golden light catching the tops of olive leaves. Behind them, the village was slowly waking. Fires crackled, water splashed from pitchers. The smell of fresh bread reached them on the breeze. As Noah stood to return, the girl stayed seated. "I'll stay with her a little longer," she said, touching the wooden dove. Noah nodded and walked the path slowly, hand trailing along flowering branches, heart steady. The world no longer waited for disaster or rescue. It waited for growth. And growth was happening all around him. That afternoon, a young boy, son of Shem, ran excitedly through the rows of grapevines toward the gathering place. "The wild figs," he called. "They're ready." Its baskets were fetched, and by late afternoon, families were gathered in the grove. Children with sticky fingers reached into baskets piled high with soft, sun-warmed fruit. Noah picked one up and bit gently. The sweetness burst on his tongue. He closed his eyes. "I remembered the first figs after the flood," he said to no one in particular. "They tasted like forgiveness." His wife, sitting beside him on a worn woven mat, smiled and squeezed his hand. "They still do." The harvest continued into evening, laughter rising with the moon. Fireflies blinked among the trees. Someone played a soft melody on a reed pipe, the notes weaving through the night like threads of comfort. Noah leaned back against the trunk of the fig tree and watched the stars blink into view. He had once counted them, desperate for signs. Now he let them be. Their glow needed no interpretation. They simply were. And that, at last, was enough. The following morning, dew glistened on the grass like a blanket of stars scattered upon the earth. The early sun had barely kissed the hilltops when Noah's granddaughter returned to the grove. She knelt beside the carved dove, now flecked with beads of moisture, and whispered something only the wind could carry. Then, with the careful hands of someone tending to something sacred, she began clearing away fallen leaves, placing new pebbles in a ring around the wooden bird. She wasn't playing. She was preserving. Noah watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt. He understood now that the stories he had carried were not just for remembering. They were for passing. The girl glanced up and caught him looking. She waved him over. "I want to hear the one again," she said, "about the window." Noah smiled and sat beside her. "The window in the ark?" She nodded eagerly. "It was small," he said, "not for looking out, but for letting in." She leaned in, and Noah began. It was the only opening to the sky. And for days, when the rain came, and the ark creaked, and the animals stirred in the dark, it was our promise that there was still a sky, still light, still hope. He paused, letting the silence settle. "That window," he continued, "was where we released the raven. And later, the dove." He turned his gaze to the small wooden figure between them. "And one day, it came back, with a leaf," the girl whispered. He smiled. Yes, a simple thing, but it meant the world had begun again. The sun climbed higher, golden light catching the tops of olive leaves. Behind them, the village was slowly waking. Fires crackled. Water splashed from pitchers. The smell of fresh bread reached them on the breeze. Noah stood to return. The girl stayed seated. "I'll stay with her a little longer," she said, touching the wooden dove. Noah nodded and walked the path slowly, hand trailing along flowering branches, heart steady. The world no longer waited for disaster or rescue. It waited for growth. And growth was happening all around him. That afternoon, a young boy, son of Shem, ran excitedly through the rows of grapevines toward the gathering place. "The wild figs," he called. "They are ready." Baskets were fetched, and by late afternoon, families were gathered in the grove. Children with sticky fingers reached into baskets piled high with soft, sun-warmed fruit. Noah picked one up and bit gently. The sweetness burst on his tongue. He closed his eyes. "I remember the first figs after the flood," he said to no one in particular. They tasted like forgiveness. His wife, sitting beside him on a worn woven mat, smiled and squeezed his hand. They still do. The harvest continued into evening, laughter rising with the moon. Fireflies blinked among the trees. Someone played a soft melody on a reed pipe, the notes weaving through the night like threads of comfort. Noah leaned back against the trunk of the fig tree and watched the stars blink into view. He had once counted them, desperate for signs. Now he let them be. Their glow needed no interpretation. They simply were, and that, at last, was enough. The days that followed were rich with routine. Fields were tilled and sown, new irrigation channels dug, and laughter echoed more freely now, unburdened by fear. Noah, though older now and slower in step, found new joy in watching rather than doing. Children would come to him in the afternoons, asking to hear stories, not just of the flood, but of things that came before. The planting of the first vineyard, the great animals of the east, the stars named long ago. Noah's voice became the thread that stitched their afternoons together. Under the fig tree, beneath woven canopies, or inside sun-warmed tents, the next generation listened. wide-eyed, curious, safe. One evening, the village gathered once more for a celebration. A full moon hung low and golden, and torches flickered along the paths. Clay dishes filled with roasted vegetables and honey cakes lined wooden tables. In the center of the gathering, near the sacred grove, someone stood and raised a carved staff. It was Ham, his voice strong but steady. "To the dove," he said, "not just for what she carried, but for what she returned to." Crowd murmured in agreement. Glasses raised. Across from Ham, Noah stood in silence, his eyes full of starlight and memory. That night, as the embers of the fire glowed and songs drifted across the wind, Noah sat with his family, arms wrapped around his youngest great-grandson. The child had fallen asleep, cheek against Noah's chest, tiny hand curled around one of his fingers. The sky above them spun slowly, patiently, and below it, life, beautiful, rooted, and new, unfolded one quiet breath at a time.